Lance, thank you so much for coming on my podcast. Welcome, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Alexis.
Okay.
It's like good old days. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So Lance Hansen, you are the superintendent of the Lewiston School District.
Yes, I am. Independent School District number 1 in Lewiston, Idaho. Yes, thank you.
Yes. Okay. So a couple of things. One, actually, that was actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you, like straight out of the gate. I know I have known you for quite many years because you were the assistant superintendent when I was on the school board for Lewiston. And I remember, I'll never forget, it was at it was like the beginning of the year when all the employees come to the school district and you're standing there in front of everyone, welcoming all the employees back. And I had seen, like, you're talking and you're, welcoming the new people into the district. And as you're talking about, like, you're giving a little bit of a bio on each person. And all of a sudden, for the first time, I hear someone go, the University of Idaho. And I was like, what is happening here? What's going on? And now I hear you say Lewiston School District number 1. And so anyways, tell me, Lance, this is like something that you do, which is like just really darling. But why do you like emphasize Lewiston School District number 1? And what does that even mean?
So the Lewiston School District, its official name on titles and everything is Lewiston Independent School District number 1. It's the first school district in Idaho. It was established in 1880, 10 years prior to statehood. And actually 17 years prior to that, the city of Lewiston ran its first levy to hire a teacher, put a building together so that it can start educating their children. The reason that I emphasize that is because that's a testament to the community in which I live and their commitment to our children and their commitment to education. So technically on the books, it says 340, but I ignore that. That's just a State Department thing. Our title is Lewiston Independent School District number 1.
I love it. I love it. Okay. So
and we're number 1 for many reasons.
Yes. And I'm so excited to get into that today. But before we even started, you mentioned that you were on another podcast and you were talking about the anxious generation, which yes. I've done. I love that book. So tell me, what was that all about?
So Tom Luna we were at an event together and he asked if I would speak to him a little bit about the book and what it meant to us and my approach to it, because I actually had sent it to him and he sent it to his daughter, who's a senator as well. And I spoke to him I gave it to all of our board members and all of our principals or leaders. The reason I did that was because I wanted a foundation for us to make our decisions moving forward. So the conversation about electronic devices and all these different components, I think if you jump to that first without a basis to build on or research or something that will help to guide your decision, and especially my role is my role is to provide advice to the board. In other words, not necessarily guide them in a direction, but to really give them the best information possible to make their decisions. And that's something that I hold firm to. That's one of the reasons we have work groups, and we can probably talk about all that in a minute. But I knew that we were going to be getting a collection of individuals together to talk about the simple version of cell phone policy, but the reality of it is, what are the things that are distracting our students while they're learning in our classrooms, and what does that look like and feel like? So we talked about the book, and there's some really good parts to it. It talks about, what parents can do, what schools can do, what legislators can do, and there's some norms that he puts together about guidance. Side note, my oldest grandson is about 10-ish. And I know that my daughter was struggling a little bit about that decision. So I just took, and I guess I took pictures of just a couple of the parent pages. And I told her, sis, just take a look at this to help you guide it. It's not necessarily that screen time's good or bad. It's really talked about developmentally what we're able to process and understand that can have long-term consequences in this short piece. So I tied that to where our students were. I tied that to some other documentaries we've watched, like My Ascension is a documentary about a young lady who had attempted to take her life and was unsuccessful. And she really talks about that developmental piece. And in that, there was something that just stuck with me so poignantly. Is a psychologist had talked about not necessarily age of accountability, because we know that by about developmentally age 8, students start to really understand the consequences of their action. However, his point was that we don't start to understand the consequences of long-term impact until about age 24. And that just struck me, because when you start looking at statistics about suicide, for example, you're looking at that age gap, that whatever's happening in your life right now is not forever. And it's hard to get past that. So the anxious generation tied to some of that work that we were doing before. And we had put together in our valley. We call it a SOVA group, it's Students of the Valley Advocacy, that really talked about the things that our students are doing. So that's kind of another thing that we'd put together, because I wanted student voice to help us. I think as adults, we project a lot, like, this is what I think you should do, or I feel like this is something that's going to be beneficial to you. I said, we have to flip that. I want to know what they feel would help. And our obligation is to find the resource, because you can bring in a speaker and put them in an assembly. That has no impact. It feels good for like 30 seconds. And I wanted long-term pieces. So that's a long answer to the anxious generation, but that's where my mind went. And I wanted to make sure that our principals knew what was going on there. And we had really good conversations. And more importantly, I wanted our school board to know what was going on there. And then I have given that book, or the link to the book, to many of our parents. And as they were reading this, and they're really those parents who had probably students going into middle school and understanding it. And the other thing that's very important is, we as an adult, like my age, and my children were the first children to kind of have smartphones. Now they are parents. I had probably no clue, that's a bad way to say it, but my kind of thinking about kids, let me say this differently. I got them a cell phone so I could communicate with them. And I reminded them frequently, if you don't answer my call, that phone goes away. The other unintended parts with like the infancy of social media and the impact that it can have on self-esteem and those other pieces, probably didn't do a very good job with that as a parent. So that's a long answer to the anxious generation, but there's a lot there. And I was very passionate about that. We had experienced some loss in our valley, and it was, I guess I pulled the superintendents together one morning after we had heard the news, and I said, this has to stop. We have to do something different. So all of that kind of ties to my thinking on anxious generation.
So I'm so glad that you, that's so awesome that you can see the value of needing to inform people, like give people a context before you kind of jump in and have a conversation around policy with cell phones. And I love that you highlight that the anxious generation, that book does a nice job of that. I mean, I remember when it first came out and I was like, oh, I feel like this should be in the hands of everyone. So I love that, like, as the leader of the Lewiston School District, like, you led that out for your school community. And to me, that highlights something that I wanted to bring up in this conversation. So yesterday, I got to listen to you and your vice chair,
Vice President Charlotte Kramer.
Vice President, yes. Give a presentation to the Senate Ed Committee. So you guys are down here from Lewiston for the Idaho School Boards Association Day on the Hill, and you gave this awesome presentation in regards to like what you're doing in your school district and what you're doing, particularly, it feels like for me, with your community. And one of the things that, like, as you were talking about the Anxious Generation book, and you were like, you know what, we had this thing that we needed to discuss. And so I wanted to provide this book, in context to that. From my perspective, I feel like Lewiston has created this environment of learners where, like, you and Superintendent, like Bob Donaldson before you, I remember, like, there was a book, it was about, what was it? It was like the yellow school bus or something. And that phrasing, like, hop on my bus, that's actually something that I've used with my producer, Matt. Like, we talk about that frequently. And so to me, that is an environment of learning. And one of the things that you said yesterday in your presentation, which I just like loved, as you were like talking and as Ms. Kramer was talking, was like, I just kept nodding my head like, yes, yes. I was just, as I was sitting there listening, I was like, oh, I was feeling so much gratitude for being able to be a part of that for a period of time. And one of the things that you said that I would really like you to speak to is in regard to the district vision, which at the very beginning of that sentence, it says, in collaboration with our community. What does that mean for your school, and how do you do that with your community? Because I'm asking the question because I know that so many people want that for their school community, but it's not quite happening yet. And I feel like there's so much to learn from Lewiston.
So thank you for the question. There's a lot there. And I'll start with our process. So for a long time in Lewiston, since 1994, we had a motto: is strive, succeed, achieve, go beyond. And that's when you were on the school board. When I became the superintendent, our process was, in year one, we had some specific things that we were doing, and one of which was we were defining purpose. And I just wanted to define purpose for our schools. I wanted them to fundamentally, as a faculty, as a school, to say, why do we have Webster Elementary on 8th Street? Why? What is our purpose? Why do we have Camelot Elementary on 19th? Why is there a high school? Whatever the case may be. The reason for asking that question is it's the grounding point. That's your mission. So what is our fundamental purpose? Why do we exist? And when you're reflective about that, it starts to bring in values. The other thing is I told them, well, I let them go, and I'll get into what I think about mission and visions as far as statements. Like if you can't remember in that one sentence, there's no such thing. Then the mission part of it, which is what you're speaking to, is what must we become in order to accomplish the mission, like why we exist. So our statement was a product of about 42 people, and it was business people, parents, teachers. There was a board member in there, and we grappled with that first question first. You don't do the vision first, because you can't become something if you don't know what the purpose is. So I kept asking the question over and over, and when they get caught up in words and a bunch of flowery stuff, I said, why in 1880 did this community say, we need to educate our children? And they developed a charter, even prior to statehood. Why? And we just kept refining it. And I said, if you can't remember it, and it's not in one sentence. So when we talk about that, and our mission is to ensure high levels of learning for all students, every word in there is defined in our mission. It's not just something we say. When we say assure, that's a promise to our parents. We're not just going to hope or wish or provide support. We're going to ensure. That's powerful. What are we ensuring then? We're ensuring high levels, and I defined that. I didn't want to say, great opportunities later in life or lifelong learners, which I'm not saying that those are, if that's what your purpose is, so be it. But for us, I wanted to be very concrete. High levels of learning means at or above grade level. That would be the minimum expectation that we could promise our parents. I would hate to say if you brought me your child and they're in the third grade, we would say, well, I hope they learn at the second grade level. That's not going to work. We're going to ensure that, so that's a promise. And then if you'll notice in our mission, is all bold and italicized, because all means all for us. And we have specific goals that we set with all of our students and subpopulations, et cetera. So that was our grounding part. Then we turned our focus. How are we going to do that? And invariably, that prepositional phrase is our partner. And you've lived in our community, and you know that we rely on our community for support financially. We rely on them to send their kids to us. And so that was the grounding part, in collaboration with our community. And we talked about what the word collaboration is. The collaboration means co-labor. We're doing that together. It's not individual. It's not like we just ask our community, for example, every 5 years for a handout. We let them know how we're doing, and we know that that's what we need them to be successful together. And our community is parents, business folks, it's our staff, it's everybody that builds the community. And then the rest of that is, how are we going to ensure that high level learners? We're going to empower our students. Empower is a powerful word. And how empower them in what? We're going to make sure that our classrooms are engaging. Engaging was defined. Engaging is minds on. It doesn't mean we're just doing activity. It's minds on. And we're going to do it equitable. That means all of our students have equal access. And we're going to do it in a safe environment. And they wanted words in there, and we went around every day. What does every day mean? Well, on Sundays. And our parents they wanted that every day. That's what we must become in order to accomplish our mission, which is ensuring high levels of learning for all students. And that's kind of a long answer, but that's how much that means to me. I believe your mission and vision grounds you. In other words, it's your foundation, it's your bedrock. And then you can start setting your goals, because now that's the how part. Like, this is what we must become. This is what our purpose is. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, we set our SMART goals and we set our targets. We put a strategic plan together, but that didn't happen in a year. Like, year one was just actually building mission vision. I didn't even do the districts first. You know what I did second? Our boards. You're going to have if you do your research, there aren't a lot of boards that set their own mission and vision, but I wanted them to understand the process that our buildings were going through. And that's another kind of tenet of mine, is our boards learn with us. Our kids teach them what they're learning. They know what our staff is doing. We do the same data digs that our staff members do to understand our greatest areas of need, et cetera. So they created their own mission and vision because I asked them the fundamental question, why do you exist as a board? Why are there 5 of you elected to represent? And they had to grapple with that. And if that's what you determine it to be, to provide, team-based leadership, then what must you become in order to do that? And there's other board guidance, but it grounded, and that's sitting right on their desk every station. So when they're making decisions, if they have a question, I always refer them back to their mission vision. And I will also point out when they create exemplars of living that. Then we did the district. And some might say, well, why did you do that? Why didn't you give direction? I feel sometimes if you start things top down, people will it becomes an exercise. Because why would I want to determine who we are if you've already told me? Now, I can tell you that our missions and visions are dynamic. Some of our schools had to revisit because they had all this list of things. And it was pretty simple because when I do principal interviews, for example, interviews as I do building checks once a quarter with our principals, and every other quarter I meet with staff. But in year 1, the first thing they had to answer for me is I would say, what's your mission vision at the school? And if they looked at their paper, I said, you don't have one. If you can't tell me right now, you're not living it, if that's not part of your fabric. So with that, we had to do some wordsmithing, which is totally fine because you want to revisit that. And every year, our buildings revisit their own. They revisit and they say, is that really what we believe? And there's collective commitments and goals and other pillars that are embedded in that. But it's a reflective practice that grounds us. And I think we're getting a lot tighter, which leads to our objective. See, if I would have just started with, these are the things you need to do in order for our kids to learn at high levels, and I force you, then it becomes compliance. Compliance that's the carrot stick, command and control piece. And Covey's written a little bit about this. I'm more on the trust and inspire side because that outlives me. And that's what we want. Everything we do in life, the old adage with everyone should plant a tree that they have no opportunity to sit under. That's part of my philosophy. And I mentioned that at the Diatley dedication, if you remember, that was part of my speech. Yeah.
I do remember that. So as you're talking, one of the things that I'm realizing is that I got asked somewhat recently, oh, why is it that you care so passionately about, the things that you're involved in, like PTA and volunteering and speaking up on behalf of a school community. And one of the things that I'm realizing is that, I tell people that Lewiston is my Idaho hometown. And they don't quite get it when I say it that way, because what I mean is I didn't grow up in Idaho. My husband did. He was born and raised here. My kids are 6th generation Idahoans. But for me, Lewiston was the very first place I lived in Idaho. And I had lived in other places and been a part of other school communities. But it was in Lewiston for me that I fully realize that integration of collaboration among school community members, meaning all those people you're talking about, the school board, the district, the, patrons, the parents, the business, the nonprofits, all the things, everyone was involved in that process. And, so I'm realizing that sitting here, it's oh my gosh, I really fully experienced that for the first time when I was in Lewiston, which I feel like is such a gift. And I love that you're talking about the need for people to be grounded in their mission and vision statement. And it sounds like what's really cool is that you did that for the board, you did it for the district, and the buildings also have their own. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So awesome.
So buildings did it first, then board, then the district.
Awesome. I love it. So there's a couple of other things I want to hit in this conversation, because I feel like there's just so much value kind of locked up in what you guys are doing up there. And I want to make sure people hear about it. So one of the things that you mentioned in your presentation was in regards to, oh gosh, it just left me. Hold on. It's going to come an integration both vertically and horizontally when it comes to accreditation, meaning the entire district is an accredited group. What does that mean, and why is that important for Lewiston?
Yeah, thank you for that. And Senator Simmelroth also asked me that similar question. So I'll just start with accreditation. Accreditation historically has been about secondary and post-secondary. In other words, the idea is once you leave with a diploma or you've met a certain level of requirements, there's some third-party oversight that goes into that. And so all of our secondary schools, and actually in in Lewiston, prior to our reconfiguration, our junior highs had to be accredited as well because they had ninth grade students in them. So they were acquiring credits towards graduation. So under the guidance of Dr. Bob Donaldson, it was 2017, I think, is when we did our first system-wide accreditation, because we were kind of doing that concurrently with the bond. We had a few balls in the air. But anyway, so what it does is it looks at your system. Instead of coming in and just looking at, okay, what are the kids getting graduation, or, what classes are they taking to graduate? Are you in alignment with either your standard or your graduation requirements or the state standards, which, by the way, are the minimum in Lewiston. We have, our standards far exceed that at Lewiston High School. We just felt that it was important that all of our schools have a sense of how they contribute to our students' journey through our system, and it has to be aligned. So it really peels the onion back. It has 30 standards in which we are compared to, and it's compared across our system. And what they will do at the end is they will find powerful practices, for example, and they will reinforce those for you, because you do a self-eval as well, and they will find some areas in which you need to improve. And then that helps you set kind of the tone. The tricky part of that is if it only comes like our elementaries never knew what our powerful practice were at the high school, for example, before. I mean, they just didn't. Because I was a high school principal. I didn't know what was going on at the elementary.
Right. Yeah.
I can tell you now that's different. Lewiston,
yeah.
Okay. Because I've seen it all the way through. Mm-hmm. And for us to understand how our kids move through, and that also takes a look like, do we have equal opportunities for our kids across our system? Like, our elementaries balanced as far as the opportunities we have for kids? Because you would hope if you live in Lewiston, you shouldn't have the luck of a lottery on whether or not your kids are going to be exposed to awesome stuff. And we have a ton of that I talked about as well that we've just continued to build on. So that system, again, that systemic approach allows us to look at the things that we're doing across our system, and it defines powerful practices for us that we would emulate or replicate, and then it finds areas of improvement. And again, it also looks at like resources. So one of the things in our 2017 accreditation is it really looked at Lewiston and the resources they have available. For example, we had our own cabinet shop, we had our own electricians, we had our own HVAC folks, and that's kind of rare, and not all school districts have that ability to do that. What does that mean? We're very responsive. We're not waiting to get on someone's schedule when things happen. We have our own construction crew. We have journeyman carpenters, for example. So those are things that really stuck out of one example. The other example, though, on the areas of improvement at that time was there was a need for vertical and horizontal alignment of our curriculum, and or at the time we were data rich, information poor, which is, because there's data collected all the time.
Right.
So what are we doing with it was basically the question. And if we didn't have this is what we do, then you have a ton of data, but you don't really have the information that guides you. Those things we've improved on. And I can tell you now, anything that's collected in our school district is reported, and it's based on a goal, and our stakeholders know.
So hold on a second. When you say that, because I really like this, I want to pull this apart for just a second. Because I was a part of that 2017 one, and I still can remember they were like, okay, Alexis, we're going to put you in front of this group. And I remember saying, I just want to make sure that I'm with someone else because I'm brand new here, and I don't think it would be a good idea if I go in front of this group by myself. And then, as unfortunate luck would have it, I did go in front of the group, that I was being interviewed by myself. And it was funny because they were asking me questions, and I finally was like, I don't know. And that's not a reflection of the board. That's a reflection of the fact that I'm brand new in the seat.
Sure.
Anyways, so the data rich, information poor, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have a ton of stuff. What do we do with it?
Ton of stuff. And I sometimes wonder, if that is common with schools. One, I'm kind of curious on that. And then two, when you say you're reporting it to people, does that include parents are a part of that too? So those two things, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, going all the way back to our process, foundation, mission, vision, I just keep going back to that. So we built, and then we developed a strategic plan that has a ton of things that we measure. And what we did is that allows us to understand specifically what we're doing, why we're doing it, where we're putting our resources. And we've got the ability to have some metric that's assigned to that, and we have goals assigned to the metric. So for example, I'll just use attendance. Attendance is a goal that I have required of all of our schools to make, and they report to me. And so our parents know what the goals are. They know if we hit them or not. Because the idea is if someone sets a goal for you, the likelihood of you achieving that may or may not be like with true fidelity. When you understand how you fit into the larger scheme of things, for example, then it becomes you're a part of it. You're contributing to it. And we apply that not only with our students and our parents, but we also apply it with our teachers, individual level. Like all of our students have data folders that they track. They'll come in and they'll show their principal. They'll say, look, Miss Gomez, look at what I did this month. And they can, a first grader can come in and tell her exactly where they're at.
So when you're saying that, like you're informed, like, so let's go back to attendance, for example.
Sure.
Okay. You're informed, like, how are you informing parents, or like, what does that look like for you guys?
So you will see, like, for example, we might do an attendance blitz, right? For that. So they'll see that. They'll see, we do things like we use Seesaw as an example at our K-5, where parents we go back and they can see what's going on in the classroom. We can text them very quickly. If you're in the buildings, one of our schools started this. Every little classroom has a little flag sitting right outside of it. And if all the students are there on time and their little flag goes up, so you can look down the hall and it's visual. So everyone can see, everyone knows that, hey, yeah, perfect attendance. And if you got all the flags up, you might do something specifically. We have a ton of reward-based positive reinforcement that go along that. Because, for example, here's what I remind our elementary principals, and I know they know this, but sometimes they lay them in on this. Our 6-year-olds don't get themselves to school. Parents get them to school.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, we had, ironically enough, one instance of a little 5-year-old that walked to Whitman one morning when Tim was there across the bridge, and we're like, but regardless, good for her.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but they don't. I mean, the reality of it is our parents are our partners, and you saw that on the slide. I've coined that. I don't know if it's mine, but I can tell you that's something I've said from day one. Our parents are our partners. We need them. Well, and I'm kind of jumping around here, but it's tied. Yep. Like parent-teacher conference, I changed that. I didn't change it like as in we don't have them, but I required the following 3 things. You have to, in your parent-teacher conferences, tell the parents what the expectation learnings are of the children. That's first and foremost. What are we promising you? Like, what are the promising standards or what are the learnings? Mm-hmm. And you have to have it in parent-friendly terms, by the way.
Yeah.
Secondly, then you tell them after that, you tell them what is the progress of your child relative to expected learning. Like, we're in month 1, this is what they're doing, this is what we're going to do by the end of the year. Your son or daughter is an XYZ, or your granddaughter, or whomever you're speaking to. But here's the thing that I also require. And then you must tell that parent how they can support their child in learning. Because one of the things I always felt like the gap is we do all these things, but we don't like put it in parent terms or ways that they can support that. And it might be as simple as like reading to your child, but regardless, have a plan for the parent to have them, because you want them to walk along with you. Mm-hmm. And you can see in our parent results, I mean, you look at where they've gone. I mean, I think our average is like 88% or something like that, parent satisfaction. In some categories, over 90. And if you break it out by secondary and elementary, we're way in the 90s. Yeah. And actually, our goal is 94%. So, parent-teacher conference is coming up. So, all of our principals are like creating incentives, and this is when we get our parent feedback. Yeah. So, it's all connected. Mm-hmm. When you talk about like, how do you inform? The idea is that everyone who contributes must be part of it. And I ask our principals, and I'm really more, I don't know if it's Socratic or whatever the case may be, but I'll pose questions to principals more than I tell them. For example, I might say, wow, look what you're doing on the goals. You just accomplished this. Do your parents know? Oh, now they may or may not. That's not passing judgment. But if they're contributing, why wouldn't you reinforce that? Why wouldn't you say, you know what? All of our kids were in school. I mean, that's amazing. Our goal is 95%, and everybody's contributing. And you'll get like there's a little town in Idaho, Cambridge, and it has the little marquee out front that says we've served 1,000 happy gifts and 1 grouch. And we get those, right? Every once in a while, we'll have someone like say, the only reason you want your kids to come to school is it's funding mechanism. Well, yeah, that's part of it. But the reality of it is kids need to be learning. And they do it best when they're in school. Yeah. I don't mean that they don't learn when they're not in school, but I'm talking about what we're asking. The expectations of learning are set in the classroom.
Yeah. So I like as you're talking, I'm thinking about how it's like I was just reading something recently, and I've read it before, that like if you want kids to be successful in this process, parents need to be involved in the process. Like that's like the number one thing. And so as I was like watching your presentation and you said like, I mean, I saw it up on the board. You're like, parents are our partners. And I took I took a picture of it because I was like, I love that that's what Lewiston, like that's what Lance is saying. And Lewiston is saying is like, parents are our partners. It's so essential for that. So thank you for making that part of like your mantra. I do want you to go back and finish though, because I cut you off on like this accreditation piece for the entire, like for that whole piece.
Okay. So again, the accreditation piece allows us to determine powerful practices across our system. Again, it has 30 standards in which we are measured, and there's a ton of evidence that's collected. The evidence is collected both written. We have to show evidence of coherence in like our for example, like our professional development. What does it do? How is it connected to our learning? And we've tightened a ton of those things up. But most importantly to me, is it's someone who doesn't have any skin in the game. It's a third-party person saying, hey, this is what we've observed. And it's about as objective as you can get because they're professionals who've been around. And then they can give you guidance. And that guidance, because in life, it's always about kind of continue. It's an ongoing process. In like PLCs, if you look at the definitions, like an ongoing process of job-embedded action research, right? So that's kind of the way I look at it. Because we know every year, everybody's different. Our teachers are a year older or more experienced, and staff changes. Our parents have children now who are a year older. And if you've been a parent, sometimes you learn that, hey, maybe that didn't work. They're in a different grade level. They have different content. My point is that it's that change piece. And so when we can be reflective and look at the powerful practices that we have and the areas in which we need to improve, it keeps us focused back all the way back to our mission. I mean, I just keep going back to that. So again, that third party piece, and it's just a good lens. And it almost verifies things. Like when I tell our story, it's awesome. And I like talking about it. So if you're kind of the person like from Missouri, like the show me state, like, hey, okay, that's all good, but what are your results? Same with accreditation. We can say, listen, we have a third party that came in and looked at us, and this is what they feel and believe based on these 30 standards. And again, the 30 standards are based on powerful practices that you will see in high-performing systems. And my goal would be that our kids, if like, hey, what's your goal? I want our kids to leave our system with no barriers. And what I mean by that is I don't believe that for a minute that we're going to we have a welding program. I don't think that 400 welders should come out of Lewiston High School. But if you want to weld later, then we've provided you an opportunity to chase that. If you want to go to post-secondary, there's nothing in our system that would disallow you from being qualified to pursue a post-secondary opportunity. If you want to be an entrepreneur or move into career, the same thing. That's the way I look at kind of our system. No barriers when you walk away from us. And we're in the infancy of some of our research there, and I'm all big about finding data to support this, about calling postgrads. Like, tell me, like in year one, were you prepared? Because I think that's a fundamental question. And we've talked about that and grappled on the board. Like, what do our kids say when they go to the University of Idaho, or if they go to Harvard, wherever they're going? Did you have to remediate? Was the rigor there? Or whatever the case may be. I want you to say, the system that I left, Lewiston School System of Schools, Lewiston Independent School District number 1. When I left that, I was prepared for my next step in life. And actually, that's part of our mantra on our standards, by the way, is we say, okay, in the second grade, what must you learn? What is essential, not fun to learn, that prepares you for grade 3? That's your next step. Because if you don't have that, you may have to remediate in grade 3. So I would say that as we build those blocks all the way up through, I would hope that that's the same thing that we would say when they walk across that stage, and I shake every hand. Even as a superintendent, I wigged them out one time, but I didn't care. If you've gone through our system, I'm going to look you in the eye and say thank you and congratulations. Because that's what we're all about.
Yeah. So a couple of things that I'm thinking of while I'm listening to you. One of the things that I do know about like the Lewiston School experience, because my kids did elementary school and then some junior high there. was that my kids, I felt like the school, like my kids went to Whitman, and I felt like my kids learned a ton. They had like educators that cared all along the way, and they also had fun in the process. Like they had fun. I mean, I can still see like their happy little faces in elementary school. They had fun in that process, which like as a parent, that just makes me really happy because I think, I mean, I mentioned it yesterday during the meeting is that like, I think some of the fun has been sucked out of education for some of our kids just in all the things that we're doing. So I feel like in the intentionality and in the system, it should also be an enjoyable process for kids, right? Where they are prepared and everyone is, but we're also having a good time doing it, right? Like in my mind, I think learning should be fun. Anyways, so I'm saying that out loud. And the other thing is that like while I'm listening to you, you said something yesterday that was really interesting to me that, and it, to me, it links in with, I saw a picture at the very end of your presentation, which was of the entire Lewiston School District staff. And at the top of it, it said, "It takes all of us." And so that piece, along with what I think is included in this picture, which is professional learning communities, because you said yesterday, you were like, parents expect the same thing from a first-year teacher as they do from a veteran teacher if their kid is in that class. And that was really interesting to me because I thought, oh my gosh, it's actually, no, that's really true. Like parents, you know, we have this expectation for our kids. So for you, how does the It Takes All of Us and the professional learning community tie into making sure that parents and kids are receiving what is, you know, kind of equitable across that system?
Okay.
Okay.
That was a good one.
Yeah.
It was good because here's kind of where I'm at with learning. Let's just start with that. To me, learning is like creating fire. And fire or fire suppression or firefighting, you talk about the fire triangle. There are three elements that make fire. You have to have oxygen, heat, and fuel. If you remove any one of those three, you don't have fire. Learning to me has the three following elements. You have to have disposition, knowledge, and skill. So the disposition is what you're talking about. Like, how do we feel about ourselves and others? We actually track that in the Lewiston School District, and we set goals around that. We want our students to be minds on. I talked about what engagement is, like minds on. Well, you're going to be minds on if you kind of enjoy that. And that kind of gets into the art and science of teaching. We have some science stuff that we're pretty tight on. That's our early childhood piece. With our K2 ECRI instruction. At the same time, you will find that I know I talk a lot about results and numbers, but I can tell you our kids aren't numbers to us. Our kids are, I want them to show what they know and be proud of who they are and what they have learned. And we'll do that through a ton of activities. When I was talking to kindergarten teachers at first, when we went to all-day kindergarten, or full-day kindergarten, you were part of that.
Yep.
And someone were really concerned about like the length of the day and, oh no, we're teaching all this stuff and we need to have all this play-based stuff. I'm not going to disagree, but you can learn while you're playing.
Yeah.
My grandma taught me that all the time. Mm-hmm. Like when I went to her house, she had puzzles everywhere. Mm-hmm. Like the logic puzzles where we're taking, rivets out, or we would play cards. We would do things. But you know what I was learning? I was learning math facts. I was learning logic, and it was fun. You can do that. Every time I walked, when my grandkids or my children were little, every time we walked up and down the stairs, we counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we were doing an activity in which you were learning. So I think I felt like I kind of got that from my grandma a little bit. And I want to apply that. So it can't be just, again, our results are really great and we're doing some great things. We're not focused on the results. And what I mean by that is it goes back to like, if I go in and tell you, you have to do X versus what is the foundational piece that gets there? We know that our students have to be engaged. And when we look at engagement, we look at both. There are three parts to it. It's social, emotional, and cognitive. So how do I feel about myself and others? Do I feel I have, some ability to do the things? Like, am I prepared to do this? And those three things we measure and we set goals for those. And we also monitor it and track it and do some assessments on it. So the learning piece, I'm just going to go back to that. Learning, yes, needs to be fun, but fun kind of has that connotation like, hey, it's just like we're going to go and play Ring Around the Rosie. Not necessarily, but you can play Ring Around the Rosie and learn something. See, that's my piece. Mm-hmm. So yeah, if it's fun, kids are going to want to do it.
Totally.
And as a parent, wouldn't you want your child to want to go to school?
Oh,
100%, right?
Like, I know that like my kids show up for classes in which they are fully engaged and the teacher is engaged. I mean, my oldest, who is now in college, he will tell me that one of his favorite classes of all time was 7th grade English at Jennifer Junior High, where his teacher like challenged them and did all sorts of different things. But he was like, that class was so fun because it was like hard and real life, and we had competitions, and I was expected to take notes and then talk to my parents about stuff. And it was like, yeah, it was like rigorous, and they got like, it was information rich, and they had great, projects they were doing. And that's fun, like showing up and having that experience.
Totally agree. Now let's take that and let's expand that across the system. So in other words, we know that not all in a profession, typically you don't start hitting your stride until a little bit later. So even in our system, just as you look at it, you have to be in the system for 8 years before you're even deemed to be a master teacher, advanced, or whatever the case may be. And you start to build your craft. So then the question ends up being, and I tell our teachers this all the time, our students have 1 year to be in the 2nd grade. You're going to be there for 20 years. Okay? That 1 year for them needs to be as good then as later. So how do we do that though? Because a lot of times, well, not a lot of times, our teachers teach in isolation. In other words, they're on their own in a classroom. So with professional learning communities, it breaks that down. In other words, it supports them because now they're working with a team, a teaching partner. And that team is determining what are the essential standards that needs to be accomplished for my child to go from 2nd to 3rd grade. That's one of the 4 questions that we talk about. The second question is, how do we know? How do we know that they're learning that? So that's our common formative assessments. But more as important is, what are we going to how do we respond when students do not demonstrate knowledge or skill? And lastly, what are we going to do if they do? So it's just not like teach, test, teach, test. It's teach, intervene, extend, concurrently teaching, and we do it together. And when they do it together, they start switching kids. So for example, the master teacher might take the hard kids. Now our kids are getting an equal opportunity because it doesn't matter which class they're in. Because we're getting that strong teacher who has maybe the better skills, for example, to address a need. Or it could be as simple as this. When we do item analysis on the common formative assessment, if you and I were teachers, let's say, for example, we found that most of my students on whatever item 3 were successful and yours weren't. So now we have a professional conversation. Well, what did you do? And I start talking about, oh, well, that makes sense. I'll give you an example. When I was teaching at Moscow High School, I taught with a gentleman named James Dale. And I was, 11 years into my career, and I was teaching geometry. And we would only do it, kind of did our, like good education, I think, are collaborators to begin with, right? They look for powerful practice because they want their kids to be successful. I'll just say this. There's not a teacher that I have met that is okay with only 20 or 30, 50% of their kids being successful on anything.
Right.
Right. And if they are, then maybe we have to have a conversation about a profession, but neither here nor there. They just don't. Right. So I remember on our summit, we had a common end of course assessment in EOC, and we would always compare, and I'm extremely competitive. I want my kids to do really well. And I started looking, I'm like, okay, your kids are doing well on this, and why not? He says, well, this is just BABS, bigger angle, bigger side. That's what I teach. I'm like, well, that's just a simple thing, and just click. And then I talked to him about how my kids walk the coordinate plane. Anyway, my point was we were exchanging professional practices that we found powerful. Now my kids are doing well, and your kids are doing well. They're getting what they're expected to be able to understand triangles or whatever the topic is. It doesn't matter. So that's what we're talking about, teams. That creates equity. If I put that first year teacher by themselves on their own and say, well, I hope your kids are all proficient at the end of the year. How unfair is that to both the children and the teacher? Because our expectation is proficient. There's no family that's going to say, oh, it's okay. My kid can't read. You're a first year teacher. I understand. Yeah. That's not going to work. Mm-mm. That will not work. Nor is that the promise that we're making back to the mission. We're ensuring high levels of learning. So it's my obligation to find the resources. And what we found is that our resources are our process, our strategies, our structures that we put in place.
Okay, so I literally could talk to you like all day long about what is going on in Lewiston and like all the incredible things that are that you guys are doing, because I just, gosh, just like even sitting listening to you again, it's just like talking with you is it's just a reminder about like what an awesome school community I feel like Lewiston has, and has really worked over the years to like partner with your community. Tell me, like, as we finish the conversation, and it makes me sad to have to say that we have to finish this conversation. Tell me what does it mean to you and this, like, for the school district to partner with your community in terms of the bond that got passed in 2017, and then also recently as you guys did that second phase with your sport facilities. Like, what does that mean for you and for the district?
Well, I can tell you everything. I guess that's a big word to say. I'll just take it, and I know I got to be quick here, but when I interviewed for the principal's job at Lewiston High School, when Dr. Donaldson was taken to the central office, one of the things that was so impressive to me, kind of being from the outside, was the commitment that our community had financially to the success of our schools. And more importantly, the opportunities that were provided. Like, I went to Lewiston High School knowing or learning that our kids were getting opportunities that maybe weren't available anywhere. And definitely not when I was in school where I was at. We had like ag. Our kids have like 9 programs, 17 different pathways, and career technical, et cetera, et cetera. And I spoke to that because I knew, to me, that was something that I am obligated as an administrator or educator to provide something back to the community. It can't be one way. It has to be both ways. So fast forward, when we were doing our, and you obviously were part of of our bond campaign, we talked very specifically about what our students would be getting and how it was different than what we currently have. And it's a commitment. And whether it's, you want to say the supermajority, whatever, just think about the country we live in where you have the opportunity to tax yourself, to say, yes, I will provide additional dollars for something that maybe I don't get to personally enjoy or have a part of, but knowing full well that our kids will, and somebody has to be a doctor to take care of me later, or whatever the case may be. So that commitment was there. When we passed the bond in 2017, it was almost like a springboard to all the other things that we have. And I've said that many times because that was kind of a cloud, if you will, hanging over us. We had a study in 1994 or something like that. Matrix Group came in and looked at all of our buildings, did everything. And we had pretty much accomplished everything but the high school. It has changed. I have taken thousands of people through that school. Our community, every time that we do something at that school, for example, we broadcast it to our community crazy. Almost all of our public meetings are in the Diatley Center, our Career Technical Center, and we take them a tour. And I've even had graduates, recent graduates who graduated from the old high school, come as parents now. And they're like, I'll walk them through and they're like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I'm going to tell my mom because she didn't think that, it was expensive or whatever the case may be. But the return on investment's been amazing. So my obligation is to make sure that our community is seeing the things that they expect out of us. And when we market our supplemental levy or communicate or provide information on our supplemental levy, I put it in 3 buckets. This is either an opportunity that we value, and opportunities are basically the offerings that we have for our students, including orchestra at the middle level and elementary, music for all of our kids, PE for all of our kids, K-12 PE, specifically middle school. I've added science to all of our elementary specific science teachers, so our kids are guaranteed science instead of if we can get to it. And it's been a game changer for us this year. So anyway, opportunities. You can continue to listen. I don't get into sports because that's pilot, but these are opportunities that we all value. Because it's very rare that I talk to someone like, what, do you guys offer like construction? Kids don't need to swing a hammer. Just something as simple as that. The second bucket is a support. So what are the things that our kids need from a support standpoint? And that could be counselors at all the elementaries. It could be any type of infrastructure types of things that they need to access that. And then the last one is safety. I've never gone to a patron that said that our schools shouldn't be safe. And what I mean by safety is that's our school resource officers. I've added additional security safety officers at the high school just because of the size of it. It also includes our vestibules. You were part of that when I started that assistant superintendent, making sure we had controlled access, perimeter access, cameras. I mean, just those types of things. That's how we talk about it. But we let them know, like, here's what you're getting for that. And we don't do it every 5 years. We do it all the time. So when you talk about in collaboration with the community, that's co-laboring. And that's just not every once in a while. It's every day. Check out our Facebook. You will see our kids doing science. Every time we do a GT project, because that's an opportunity and or support. When you see kids reading in the classroom, we talk about fun, you'll see fun all over the place. Our character kindness awards. You'll see kids doing silly string stuff. You saw the board members. We have fun when we go to all of our kids and our kids present. That's something that I've put in. Every one of our board members has kids in it. There's two reasons I did that. One, I put it in front of public comment because you know what? I have friendlies out there. Every board meeting. Every board meeting I have friendlies. So those are, that's just very powerful me, mostly because, again, when I came to Lewiston, I recognized the value and, to me, the expectation that the community had. And I felt obligated to return that.
Oh, I love that, Lance. Oh, I love it. Okay, so at the end of every conversation, I always do takeaways. Like I kind of like 2 key takeaways. So what you are taking away and what I am taking away. So would you like me to go first?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I'll go first. So, and you kind of brought this up when you mentioned the school board meetings, but one of the things that like I'm taking away from this conversation is that learning is fun and that like fun can be integrated into learning. And one of the ways that I feel like that's happening in the Lewiston School District is through school board meetings. So one, you talk about during your regular board meetings, you guys have like kids presenting at every regular board meeting. So once a month, kids, some type of student presentation is coming to the board and are presenting. And I see that on social media because I follow you guys on social media. And the second thing is, and I did just see this recently, and Brad was telling me about this too, that for the work sessions, the board goes around to schools. Those work sessions are held at the different school buildings. And that like at your most recent one, the kids were there showing the school board and other district administrators like a game that they were playing, and the board participated in that process. And there's so many different things that I love about that. But one is that like one of the best ways that I think a school board can really understand what's going on in schools is if they're in the schools and they're seeing it and they're experiencing it. And so that's something that like I'm taking away is that like Lewiston, like not just the students and not just the teachers, but the board are learning and they're having fun and they're doing it in collaboration with your school community. Anyways, that's what I'm taking away from this conversation.
Well, thank you for recognizing that. I have some very specific things. There's some work behind the scenes. So when they give us a presentation, it just isn't a presentation. They have to tell us how they're living their mission and vision in their school, or something that they're learning that's specific to some of our initiatives. So, for example, PBIS, we're a K-12 PBIS system. So we would have students come talk about how positive behavior intervention supports has helped them. Like we had a student say, I was on check-in and check-out. This is what I did. I come and check in. So our board is learning, not just getting a presentation. They're learning. So another example is going back to our student engagement components. One of the questions that's on there is, how do I feel at the end of the day? That's what's asked of our students. And there are 6 responses to that. One of them is like, I'm glad the day's over, et cetera, et cetera. And each of those, whatever they select, falls into one of those 3 buckets, like cognitively engaged, disengaged, rebellion, or basically passive. So it's the engagement of the cognitive, emotional, and social piece. So regardless, some of our teachers were lamenting, especially our middle school teachers, like, well, what do you think a kid's going to say? Like, of course I would pick that too. And I said, let's turn this around. What would you want them to say? Wouldn't you want them to say, I can't wait till tomorrow? So taking that concept, so we wrote goals. not just specifically on that, but they find their lowest area and they have to write goals for me and they got to tell me, and I don't tell them what to do.
Right.
So watch Clean and Green by Covey. Our Clean and Green is, you want to change that. Now you got to figure out how to do that. I don't care how you do it, but I can tell you that's the goal, right? So Webster Elementary did a presentation on what they do ambush. So an ambush is a group of tigers, and they're tigers at the end of the day. So what they start doing now is community circle at the end of the day, and they have that discussion like, hey, how was your day? What are you thinking about tomorrow? So they're getting to that essence of trying to get that disposition, the 3 parts of learning, to be there so those students can talk about their day. And by the way, they were talking about how exciting science was, and some of our gen ed teachers didn't like that, but that's okay. They're like, wow, science is awesome.
Yeah.
But that was a piece, and see, they're taking something that they're working on, and the other rule that I have is adults can't present. I'm not interested in somebody giving me a PowerPoint. All of our kids speak. Our adults walk up, we introduce them, they sit back, and they talk. Now they may, fill in some details and answer questions, but our kids present. That's a hard no for me. I'm not interested in watching a power slide. Now that doesn't mean that they can't bring us something, but you know what it does? I've got sitting in that boardroom, I've got parents of children, grandparents of children. It's just like the play. And you know what they see? They see how our board interacts. They know the faces. Our board members see them. They see we say the pledge. There was a myth that we don't do the pledge, and one patron comes up and says, I can't believe you do the pledge, because our kids lead us in it. Of course we do that at all our board meetings, for example.
Right.
So it's kind of a long answer to that, but there's just so many things that, again, I feel obligated to connect everybody. That's my role. And I want our community to know that they've got great schools that they're investing in. And this is what is great about them. Great as in they're getting what they desire or want.
Yes. I love that. Oh my gosh, Lance, thank you so much for taking.
Of course.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I so appreciate you, and thank you for.
You want my takeaway?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Sorry about that. I know we're probably way over here, but
no, excuse me.
My takeaway is I just always appreciate the opportunity that I have to spend time with you. Okay, I appreciate. I've told you the story before, and I remember the very first time you spoke at the Red Lion at the time, and how articulate you were and passionate you were, being even new to our community and having that outside lens and having the foresight to know that this is a game changer. This school would be a game changer. And then when you were on the board, you were appointed to the board. I appreciated working with you. You asked hard questions, which I appreciated digging into and finding the answers to. You guys had a lens of community as well. You're one of the reasons we reduced the supplemental levy rate. If you remember that, we went from $4.39 down to $4.20. And by the way, we're down to $3.95. So we keep going. But there was a lens that the community was a part of that. We need to be receptive of what that looks like and feels like. And every time I see you, your continued engagement with our parents, because PTA is that, Parent Teacher Association. It's a combination, parents as partners. And I always appreciate that. And I really thank you for the opportunity to have a conversation with you.
Oh, you're so awesome. You're welcome, Lance. You're welcome. And I just wish you all the best in Lewiston as you continue forward with what you're doing to help your school community.
I'll take it.